Well, tonight I've got to give you a warning that some of the vision you're about to see may cause shock and distress, and I hope it does actually. It's a warning because Australia's just had its October 7, the slaughter of innocent Jews, 15 people murdered, 42 injured by two Muslim gunmen, a father and a son, shooting at Jews celebrating Holy Hanukkah at Bondi Beach, forcing parents and their children to hide behind scraps of cover as they were picked off, as if this was a war zone in Australia. These Jew haters shooting at Jews for some 10 minutes until police finally killed one and wounded the other. But not before these evil men had murdered two rabbis and even a 10-year-old girl. Murdered without shame or pity because, they were just Jews. And now today, on this day of grief and fear and terrible, terrible shame for our country, let me tell you what I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear politicians just sending their thoughts and prayers. I especially don't want to hear our Prime Minister and others say, look, I'm shocked. I could never have imagined this terrorism could happen here in Australia. Because I say to them, are you blind? Are you deaf? How could you possibly not see that this day would come? And worse, how could you have added petrol to this bonfire of Jew hatred that has now changed our country forever? And that was a question put to the Prime Minister at his first and his deeply unimpressive press conference last night, just after the shooting. And Anthony Albanese had no answer.
In September, your government recognised a Palestinian state. Your ministers have attacked the Israeli government. Senior ministers refused to visit the sites of the October 7 massacres, and you created a special Islamophobia envoy alongside an anti-Semitism envoy. Have you taken the threat of anti-Semitism seriously, and can you guarantee the safety of Jewish Australians?
Yes, we have taken it seriously, and we've continued to act. We've continued to work with Jewish community leaders.
The Jewish leaders here and the furious Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, they've also been holding the Prime Minister responsible. Netanyahu said he warned Albanese in writing last August, when Albanese had made his disastrous decision to recognise the state of Palestine. Netanyahu warned him that this was rewarding the slaughter of 1,200 Jews by Hamas terrorists 2 years ago and would encourage more killings.
I wrote, your call for a Palestinian state pours fuel on the anti-Semitic fire. It rewards Hamas terrorism. It emboldens those who menace Australian Jews and encourages the Jew hatred now stalking your streets. You did nothing, and the result is the horrific attacks on Jews we saw today.
And to that charge, Albanese today had another weak reply.
This is a moment for national unity. This is a moment for Australians to come together. That's precisely what we will be doing.
Now, I'm not like the hundreds of readers who posted comments on my newspaper column today who blamed Albanese personally for yesterday's deaths. I've got to ask him, would a better word from him, a tougher press release, really have stopped these gunmen who are of Pakistani background, the father here since 1998, on a student visa originally, and his son actually born here, getting into his Islamic religious studies, again, right here. Could Albanese really have stopped them? And yet, I cannot deny that Albanese made Jews feel abandoned, and he made this attack and future ones actually more likely. He acted recklessly when all the evidence should have screamed at him, as it has screamed at me for decades, that this Jew hatred was growing and growing deadly. Yet Albanese not only failed to confront it, he fed that hatred instead. Now I want to break this up into two parts. First, the warning signs that this government ignored, and then I'll go through how the government instead made this horror more likely. Now we shouldn't actually be surprised that this massacre yesterday happened, because many Jews have feared this for years, as have I. And you consider, for decades even, this country's leaders persisted in bringing in people from war-torn, backward tribal countries with very different values, when the odds were, of course, that they would struggle to fit in. And generation of leaders since never learned. Not even when the terrorism attacks started. Attacks by Muslims we'd actually accepted as refugees, like Man Monis, an Iranian refugee who staged the deadly Lint Cafe siege in 2014, or Farhad Jabbar, an Iranian refugee who killed police accountant Curtis Cheng, or the Somali-born refugee who murdered a worker in Melbourne, shot 3 police and said, "This is for IS, the Islamic State. This is for Al-Qaeda." And then the Somali refugee who stabbed to death a Melbourne restaurateur in a jihadist attack. Yeah, and then there were all the terror plots that, thank God, never happened, that ASIO and the police managed to disrupt. And all the hate preachers praising jihad, preaching Jew hatred. And I say it again, given all that, an attack like the one yesterday began to seem inevitable. Yet the Albanese government refused to heed the warnings. It even gave tourism visas to 3,000 Palestinians from Gaza, territory controlled by Hamas Islamist terrorists, and then even had them welcomed at the airport by Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke. It also helped bring back to Australia the Islamic State brides. And it pandered so badly to the Muslim vote that it treated Israel as an enemy, a war criminal, further feeding that insane Jew hatred and hysteria. I don't have time to list all the Albanese government's sins in this area. You heard that journalist mention a few of them. I'll add a few more. How about voting against Israel in the United Nations, or recognising that Palestinian state to the delight of Hamas, or like failing to condemn notorious hate preachers, refusing to rule out arresting Israel's Prime Minister for war crimes, and relentlessly criticising Israel every time it dared to defend itself. And all this while our streets burned with Jew hatred. Burned from just 2 days after the Hamas attack on the Jews, which started the war in Gaza, when anti-Israel protesters disrupted a commemoration for the Israeli dead, a commemoration of the Sydney Opera House, demanding instead to know where the Jews were.
Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews?
And the Jew hatred really went off the scale in those weekly anti-Israel protests. I mean, men in Melbourne were even carrying the yellow flag of the Hezbollah terrorist group and a portrait of the Hezbollah leader. And some chanted this war cry in Arabic, a warning that the armies of Muhammad were coming for the Jews. And now 15 people slaughtered at a Hanukkah festival. A festival that was openly advertised. Where are the Jews? They are here. Come and get them. And then there are the warnings that were missed. I mean, how did the older one of those 2 killers get permission for not 1 gun, 1 long arm, but 6? 6. And why didn't police or ASIO link that astonishing level of gun ownership to the son who'd attended a troubled school with many Muslim students and in 2019 had hung out with very worrying characters? ASIO knew this. Although just what kind of characters they were, the Prime Minister and Home Affairs Minister today refused to say.
That's a question with respect to for the ASIO Director General, but that it was people he was associated with rather than things that he himself had done.
It's the exact same answer that the Prime Minister just gave, that the assessment of ASIO was with respect to his associations rather than at that point there being a personal motivation from him.
ASIO closed the file and didn't tell.
No, you're making a whole lot of extra assumptions. We've given you the information and that's what we've given you.
It's all been so reckless, tragic. And now for the Prime Minister to say, well, we're going to stamp out Jew hatred. Seriously, is that going to happen? Are we going to muzzle every hate preacher now? Cut out the pages in the Islamic holy texts that urge the killing of Jews? It's all too late. I can't see anything doing much good, in fact, without a complete revolution. Far more than that. I mean, how about slashing immigration from hard to assimilate countries and making Australia proud again, something that newcomers would love to pledge allegiance to? You know, become a one flag nation again, honour our past, not treat it as shameful. Do you think Albanese is going to agree to all that? How about stripping taxpayer funding of those who don't just hate Jews, but hate this country? And I tell you, even all that will not now be enough. But we've got to try. Because this attack, well, you can see it's already shattered us. What will another do to our country?